Why is a spiritual awakening difficult? Here's how you can make it easier. Hi, I'm Saratoga Ocean, and I guide people through their spiritual awakening so they can experience an ascension journey with peace, clarity, and power. In this video, I'm going to explain exactly what a spiritual awakening is and why it can be so difficult. I'm going to give you the clarity that you need to have a greater level of control over the process. And this will make it much easier for you to navigate through the entire experience. And if you're new to my channel, welcome, and make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you catch all of my future videos to guide you on your spiritual awakening. So let's start with talking about what is a spiritual awakening. In order to understand that, we have to go back to the very beginning of when we are born. And when we're born on this earth, we essentially completely forget who we are. We forget where we came from. We're basically kind of like asleep, and we are essentially a blank slate. So think of yourself in that way. We're sort of like biologically like a blank slate, and then we are programmed and told who we are. We're given a name. We're told by our families, by society, by school. We're told everything about ourselves. So we tend to form our entire identity around these instructions, and we also form our identity around all of our past experiences that we accumulate from birth all the way up to the present moment. So it's sort of like we go through life without realizing it. We're kind of sleepwalking and living almost like a programmed existence. Now, even though you might feel like you're wide awake, which I know we all do on a physical level, we are still very much asleep throughout that entire journey. We're completely asleep to who we really are. So we're just kind of going along through life, assuming that everything we've been told is all there is that we need to know, right? However, at the same time, in recent times especially, there are much higher forces of nature and evolution in this gargantuan universe that are always moving life in the universe along to evolve and ultimately to ascend to a much higher dimension of reality. So because we're in a very accelerated time right now, what happens is that light enters into our being. It doesn't just enter into the planetary realm, sort of like an outside phenomenon. It enters into us at our very core. And what does light do, right? Light illuminates. Light brings clarity. Think about it this way. If you're in a dark room and you can't see what's there, you might be assuming that you know what's there. Or, to use the analogy of what I'm talking about right now, what if you were in that dark room and somebody was saying to you, well, let me tell you what's in this room. There's this and this and this and this. You can't see anything, so you just believe them, right? But then someone turns on a light and all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, there's all this stuff. I didn't really understand my situation, but I'm starting to understand it now. So what happens is a spiritual awakening occurs when that powerful cosmic energy, those forces of nature and evolution in the form of light and higher vibrational energy, enter into our being and begin to wake us up. So what is happening in a spiritual awakening is your true self is beginning to open your eyes and awaken to your actual situation. So a spiritual awakening occurs and you might wake up rather quickly, or it might be a little bit more slowly. But what actually happens is something within you is changing, is becoming more clear, and you might be looking around at your life all of a sudden, the life that you were so programmed to live, that you thought you were doing so well because you were getting all this approval or whatever, and you start to wake up and you're like, what am I doing? Because what you're experiencing, you start to experience that this programmed life that you've been taught to live is actually completely incongruent with your higher, most profound and powerful divine creative self. And as this experience becomes more and more real for you, this is where the difficulty in a spiritual awakening begins. We start to become aware during our awakening that we are actually kind of living as two different identities. We have the identity that we've worked all of our lives to form. And then as we awaken, we begin to realize that all of our relationships and all of our choices in life have been based on that previously programmed and conditioned identity. And that may not be at all congruent with our new experience, our newly awakening experience of a very different kind of being. In other words, our true self, who we really are in the universe, not just on this tiny little planet Earth. Now, as this inner light increases more and more, if we don't understand our situation, we can actually become quite confused and suffer some real pain in that process. And see, that could take the form of suddenly some relationships you've been involved with, you don't feel real connected to those people anymore. Perhaps your line of work, you suddenly feel that there's just no energy for you to be doing that anymore. So all of these things can start to manifest in your experience. And this is why it's so important to be very clear about what is actually going on so that you can be centered and grounded and consciously navigate through your own awakening. So the fastest way to navigate through a spiritual awakening with as little difficulty as possible is to have the courage and the clarity to start to question and face our actual situation on this planet. And this, guys, is where I'm going to say some very controversial things. And I'm saying these things from having a perspective that is beyond this earth, that is more universal or extraterrestrial in nature. Remember, I always say an extraterrestrial perspective does nothing to do with UFOs or little green men. It has to do with standing back from the planet, seeing your situation from a bigger picture so that you can have a more profound understanding of what is actually going on. Now, I believe in using common sense. So I don't want you guys to believe anything I'm telling you. I want you to just consider some of the things I'm saying, check in with your own common sense and say, is this a possibility? Is it possible? In other words, it's so important to ask questions, to feel the freedom and the confidence to ask some new questions about our situation here. Now, it is my belief, certainly my theory, actually it's probably more than a theory for me, but it's probably more like a belief, that we're basically living in a slave system. Okay, that's it. When you are told, when every single person is told to comply and to mirror the status quo, the actual sequence of life that you're supposed to follow, which you guys have probably heard me say if you're following me a lot, you get educated for 20 to 25 years of your life, you get a good job, you work until you're worn out, then you retire and you die. And in between, you're supposed to reproduce, to produce more humans to do the very same thing. And in between, you also get holidays and recreation to make the entire thing a lot more bearable. Well, the first thing that should be suspect in that scenario is that everything's coming from the outside. Everything is being told. Everything is about uniformity and conformity and conditioning and programming. So I call it like a conveyor belt system that we all go through. Now, if you don't know that there's anything else or there's any other experience, you're just going to say, well, I guess that's just the way life is. Now you might say, okay, well, if that's true, then why? Why are we programmed? Why are we put in this situation? Well, I like to step back and say, okay, what have humans been doing primarily on this planet for a very long time, from way back? We have been essentially developing technology, right? Starting with, you hear these stories about primitive humans developing the wheel, discovering fire, weapons, primitive weapons, and then it just goes on and on. Then we get into agriculture, the Industrial Revolution, and it just speeds up faster and faster and faster as we go through our very small history on this earth. So if you look at the whole human species, I guess you could say, what have we as a whole been doing? We've been developing technology and ultimately leading to artificial intelligence, AI. So it's conceivable. I don't think it's a crazy idea to think that maybe We are put here for the sole purpose of developing this AI system of life, because now, as a result of that, everything is going to dramatically change. And that's why, guys, we all need to wake up in a very big way so that we know what we're doing in the universe, not just on planet Earth. Okay, so now I'm going to say controversial thing number 2. And that is the common theory that the reason we forget why we're here, we forget who we are, we forget everything we need to know, is because God wanted it this way. Because, according to this theory, God wanted to know what it would feel like to experience all of this weird stuff. Okay. I'm not buying that, guys. It doesn't make any sense. That makes God sound kind of like, I don't know, weird? If you want to believe that, like I said, don't believe anything I say. You guys need to check in with your own experience, your own intuition, and your own heart. So I'm just giving you some stuff to think about. Anyway, that doesn't make any sense to me, and I'm going to make another more in-depth video about exactly why it is we forget who we are. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that one. Now here's the real reason that I think we forget who we are, and the fact that we forget is the whole reason the spiritual awakening is so difficult, right? I think the reason we forget who we are could possibly be because we are genetically engineered to forget. So why would I say that? Because it's conceivable that we could have had certain aspects of our DNA turned off so that we do not connect with the infinite, so that we do not see interdimensionally, etc., etc. I say that from my own experience. I can see the beings that I channel more clearly than I see you guys standing in a room. To me, that's a genetic switch that's been turned on so that I can actually see interdimensionally. So if my theory is true or reasonable in any way, it kind of makes sense that we would be engineered to forget or to lose access on a biological level, to lose access to who we are for one reason and one reason only. So that we stay focused on the task, so that we stay focused on the conditioning, so we stay focused on the program, and we do not deviate and function in ways outside of that conveyor belt system. And honestly, guys, this makes so much more sense to me than just saying, well, God just wanted to experience all this weird stuff. Okay, that's just me. Now, if you're willing to entertain these ideas, your next question might be, well, who would be doing this? Where is this coming from? What's the source of all this stuff? And you know what's really great? We don't even have to know that, because it's very obvious based on this ascension process that we are in the middle of, that this stuff's on its way out. This is not going to continue. Whatever has created this situation is literally no match for these gargantuan cosmic powers of restorative evolution. And I call it restorative evolution because it's all about restoring truth, restoring harmony, and restoring alignment with love, light, and omnipresent oneness. And the fact that so many of us are awakening is proof that the tide is turning away from this situation. So to put this in a nutshell, the essence of a spiritual awakening is waking up from a programmed, conditioned existence that has a certain identity formed around that existence, to waking up to who you really are as a universal being and realizing that you're so much more than that. And then the difficulty is when you experience the incongruency of those two separate identities. Now, here's how to make this difficult situation much easier. The first thing is self-awareness, to allow yourself to be receptive and open to what your situation actually is, and into the fact that you're actually experiencing a certain kind of duality, the programmed self and the infinite true self. So you want to start to shift your focus and shift your center over to that true self that you are as an infinite being, and realize that your desire as that being is a desire for love, for light, for empowerment, and for the ability to create from the love that you are. I mean, even if you feel torn between the two different realities, the truth is you probably want to go back to your true self, because your true self is awesome. So the first thing to realize is that you have a choice in terms of your direction. You have a choice to determine the speed and the quality of that transition from that programmed prior self back to your true infinite self who lives in the real world of omnipresent love. So your spiritual awakening is actually a microcosm of a larger advance in evolution in the universe. And this is what it feels like as an individual human being to experience it inside your own life. So when you understand the goal of a spiritual awakening, you can actually learn to take control of your situation. And you should, because you really are a very powerful infinite creator. So what you want to do is do some inner contemplation. Allow yourself to become radically self-aware. Now that might sound a little frightening if you think that you're alone, but you're not alone. You have these powerful forces of nature and evolution that stand behind you in love, that are here to support you. You have your angels, there's so much positive energy in this universe that is moving everything in this much more beautiful direction. So you are definitely not alone in terms of your journey through your own awakening. So just begin to open your eyes at your own pace. Realize that you have the power to choose how to make your transition comfortable for you in the best way possible so that you can function as a co-creator with the universe in terms of your spiritual awakening and your transition into becoming centered into the power and light and love that you truly are. So leave me a comment below and let me know if you are experiencing a spiritual awakening, and if so, how is that going for you? How are you doing with your own experience of this journey? And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and share it out with your friends. And remember to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss any of my future videos to continue to guide you on your spiritual journey. And with that, I'm sending you loads of love, light, and positive energy. Have a beautiful day. Namaste.